Hey everybody, good evening and welcome to another episode of the Reveal Report. I've been away for a few weeks. I want to thank everyone for all the love, support, and prayers they've sent my way. Needed a little bit of time off, guys, because sometimes you get stressed doing these type of things, coming up with content, doing research, dealing with so much, a lot going on my plate. So I appreciate the time off. We're back. It is Monday, and what an unbelievable show we have today. Alien Contact. And our guest, I discovered a few months back. I was, scrolling, looking at podcasts and so forth, and this gentleman came up, and I sat there and I listened to his podcast, and he talked about demonology, and he got into it, and he was very knowledgeable, well spoken. And I thought this guy's perfect. We need to get him on. We finally got him on, and his show is a blockbuster. All of you guys showed love and support, and you said please invite him back. So I'm trying to make it a monthly thing if possible, pending on his availability. But we were backstage, me and Jesse, just listening to just a couple of tidbits on what he's going to drop today. Guys, fasten your seatbelts. This is a master class today. We're not talking about a regular podcast. This is a master class. So you'll have to get a pen, take down some notes. Some of the things he's going to say you might want to do your own research on, and we recommend that anyway. So get on it. But before we get started, I want to thank you all for supporting. Guys, we're almost at 50,000 subs here on YouTube. We had close to 10,000 on Telegram, almost 13,000 on Twitter, Instagram. I think we're up 3,500. So we're growing our social media, and all we're doing is talk about the supernatural, the occult, the paranormal, the esoteric, things that not everyone likes to discuss. What do we talk about? These are the things that we talk about. So we welcome you here, and I'm so impressed and surprised that everyone wants to know about these type of things. There's so much to discuss, guys. Never-ending topic, so we thank you for being here. I also want to do a special shout-out to a particular lovely lady by the name of Stephanie S. Stephanie S. today decided to grace us with a little gift on PayPal. She was the only one. It means a lot. Thank you so much. She is special for allowing this to happen and go through. Guys, we put a lot of work and effort into these shows, and we appreciate everything you could do. Some of the shows hit 12, 15, 16,000 views just here, not cut paste on TikTok, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, other channels that take the material. As long as we share them till it's great. But anything you can to do and help goes a long way. So Stephanie S., God bless you. Thank you so much for your help tonight. Guys, without further ado, let me introduce my co-host. Please welcome Ms. Jesse Zaboter. Jesse, welcome back.
Hey, good to be back.
It has been a couple of weeks, and we are here in full throttle. Our guest is about to join us. We're going to get into it. Alien contact. What is this alien contact? How do we communicate with aliens, or are they demons? That's the question. We could do it through so many different ways. And when at first I heard Nathaniel discuss these certain things, I was like, huh. And I started researching a little bit more. But man, it's nothing compared to what he could do. So I'm not going to waste any more time. I know you're all waiting. You got your coffee, your tea, your water, your juice, whatever drink you have, and your snacks. Sit back. Please welcome our guest for the evening, Mr. Nathaniel Gillis. How are you, buddy?
It's great to be here, and I'm so excited to be on with you guys. You're both of you, and so just looking forward to get into the research. It's going to be new for a lot of people, and so put your seatbelt on and let's get out of our comfort zone and look at the data set.
Let's get it. Let me start off with this question. Mm-hmm. Are we going to touch in any way, shape, or form on yoga?
A little bit, because, and this is what's so fascinating about what we're doing here, is the model I'm going to present in tonight's show can be used and employed in yoga and any other aspect of contact with the phenomenon. So the questions I'm going to be proposing is it us conjuring them, or are they conjuring us?
Whoa. Wow. Okay. So let's start off with yoga, and then we can work your way. I'm going to start off asking the question, if you don't mind, about yoga. I'm going to play a quick clip because I found this to be interesting. It's going to open up our eyes and our ears. And then, Nathaniel, I'll let you take it away and run with it. So, yoga. Many people ask the question, is it a way to communicate with spirits, demons? Is that possible? Guys, we'll pose the question. One particular individual who was an actual yoga instructor had this to say. It's about a minute or so clip. Turn up your volumes and take a look at this.
Is yoga actually demonic? Is it actually something to be concerned about? Or is it a bunch of just paranoia from these religious Christians thinking everything's demonic? Well, let me tell you, 2 years ago, I was a certified yoga instructor with hundreds of hours of training. And it was my passion. My passion was healing. My passion was helping people heal. And little did I know I was deceived. And not until I was saved by Jesus Christ did I know that, whoa, yoga is a whole different animal. This isn't just stretching and physical exercise. If you truly follow yoga, the spiritual path of yoga, the word yoga is to be yoked with, to be united with. And in the ancient texts of Hinduism, the Vedas, and the Bhagavad Gita, which is like the Hindu Bible, talks about being yoked with the universal consciousness. It's all about merging your soul with the universal consciousness. Now, most people going to yoga studios doing yoga have no idea about this, nor do they have any really desire to do that. They're mostly there for physical exercise, for mental health, and something beneficial to their life to just stay healthy and stay flexible, which are all great things. But the thing is, you are pursuing that under a greater covering, under a greater mission of yoga, which is completely anti-biblical, completely anti-Christian, and will actually end up in extreme demonization, because these gods and goddesses, many of the yoga poses are actually used to worship specific gods and goddesses. And not all of them. Many others have actually benefits to the body, to the organs, to the nervous system, to the anatomy of the human body. But others are specific poses and sequences to worship the sun, to worship specific gods like Shakti and Shiva and Ganesha. And the true religion of yoga is much more than just stretching.
So, some of these things are helpful for your organs and body. Others are strategically and specifically designed to worship different type of hosts, entities, and demonic beings. Therefore, we open up a gateway and a doorway to communicate with these things. Let us begin first with Jesse. Really quick thoughts on this. We've discussed it before. What have you seen and what have you heard about this type of stuff?
I think the powerful statement he made was, that there's a yoke there, and what are you yoking yourself with? And if these poses are connected to spiritual beings, in engaging in that worship of that being, even in a pose, you're yoking yourself to or underneath that being. So that's concerning thought for, those, especially if you're Christian, or, how do you decipher? It's hard to just pick and choose if the core of it is an act of worship to something, other than God. So that makes it a challenge,
Well said. All right, Nathaniel, take it away. Did you do any research on this? Or what do you know about this type of thing?
Well, the phenomenon likes to induce people into rituals that they are not even aware of. That is a fact. And a lot of this does have the ability to create covenants, or like she said, right, yokes, to where you're doing something, you're not even knowing why you're doing it, but you're actually furthering, again, what we were talking about in the green room, a conscious connection between some of these beings. And then that, in some cases that I've had, that actually opens up doors for attachments and for what ufology calls the hitchhiker or hijacker effect. And so what the individual mentioned, I agree with that completely. And with both of his points, right? Number one, some of it does seem to be harmless. It's not really what we're referring to, right? Let the harmless be harmless. But in terms of rituals, that's when my ears get perked up and I start to draw a fine line between them, because that ritual is being done on the behalf of something else. And we don't quite know what that something else is yet.
So on that, Nathaniel, you know, are we communicating with aliens, or are they other gods? What are these creatures? That's why we said alien
Ooh.
contact. But are they alien?
Mhm.
What are your thoughts on that?
In terms of a species, perhaps, it goes back to the ancient argument of what a spirit is. What is a spirit? Can we measure it? Right? Does it have a constitution to it? Is it quantifiable? But in terms of the origin of these beings, yes, there is quite a movement right now in ufology that wants to obfuscate any and all connections between these beings and what we would consider to be the occult. Not just the occult, but some very dark aspects of the occult. And it's I've been doing shows now specifically like for the last week and a half, and this has been kind of the focal point of the subject matter. And that is, yes, that ufology seems to be controlling the narrative. And each and every time somebody gets close to it, which I'll mention this too here in a second, where scientists, even in the 1970s, were approaching the phenomenon as if they were extraterrestrials, right? As if they were just looking for the scientific method. And one by one, my friends, right before they were about to publish their findings, which said they weren't aliens at all, these men were found dead in deserts, allegedly their own hand did the right, trying to circumvent that point. But whatever they were uncovering was not kind of, but it was absolutely deconstructing the extraterrestrial narrative within ufology. All of them, number one, this is important. All of these scientists had their entire worldview, which was usually secularist and materialist, absolutely obliterated.
Wow.
Because what they realized was this was not extraterrestrial at all. That was merely a mask the phenomenon was using to propagandize everyone around it. Now, may I suggest this is profound too? This is some of the darker research I've been doing as of late, unfortunately. But one of the scientists was a guy named Dr. Rene Hardy. He was a professor and he was an inventor. He had over 250 patents. But he had also came to these startling conclusions along with his other contemporaries. And that was that, yes, on the outside, on the exterior, the phenomenon wants us to believe there's some kind of other out there in the ether, when truly they were here on Earth. They were something a little bit more spiritual. They wanted altars. They wanted worship. And just before Professor Rene Hardy was set to go out and reveal all of his research, he too was found deceased.
Wow.
Allegedly at his own hand. Now, here's where the narrative starts to deconstruct. When his family had his funeral, okay, all of his contemporaries are there, all of his fellow teachers and the faculty are present. His family members remember witnessing a group of 6 men enter the funeral parlor. All of them were of abnormal height. People remember photographing them. People remember talking to them. But when they went back to look at the footage, they never showed up.
What?
They were not there. Or they were, and we're dealing with something a little bit more sinister and a lot more powerful than some, even in ufology, would like to, even entertain. My point here is that it seems like not only is this tied to the occult, but that there is a control matrix designed, built into the narrative that will go out of its way and has to silence not just the religious, not just the sacred, but even the secularists from coming forward and saying, listen, at first blush, yeah, it seemed extraterrestrial. But when they got down to the actual pathology, these beings want to be worshipped. They want altars built in their honor, and they're willing to kill people to hide it.
Very, very interesting. So that's a great take on this. in regards to any form, whether it's yoga, whether it's meditation, whether it's the occult, whether it's ritual ceremony, opening up these doors, creating altars in one way, shape, or form. You're communicating, and you're trying to, I guess what you would say is worship them, which it is. Anything that I learned occultically, ritual ceremony, there's a price to pay. For what we want, we must do something in return for them. They know this.
Absolutely.
They are not stupid. And so, there is a type of worship. So it's interesting you say that. It's also, based on different gods. What we're taught. We're taught there's only one. Typically, there's Lucifer, Satan, the one evil being, but there's soldiers, there's demons, there's different cultures, different entities. And I want to just add a little bit more context really quick, because a priest touched on that briefly in regards to yoga. Here's what he had to say. Listen carefully, then I'll get both your comments. Take a look.
Father, is yoga demonic?
Well, first of all, this is idolatry, because those religions are pagan. They worship many gods. And we know there's only one God. So who are they actually worshiping? They're worshiping demons. This is the biggest sin of the Old Testament, and I would say of the New Testament. When did God get really fired up at his people? When they worship false gods. So when you're doing these poses, those particular poses, and they're not ordinary poses, they're very odd and distinct. That's like sending up a bat signal to get Batman to come visit you, except it's going to be a demon that's associated with that pose. When we make the sign of the cross, we're invoking the Trinity. When they make those poses, they're invoking that particular demon that goes with that pose.
There you go. There's your ritual. You're worshiping. You're signing off. You're calling upon them. Thoughts on that? Let's begin with Jesse.
Yeah, I think a key in that is, the images that we're seeing, the things that are coming together. We know that they're going to have an altar. We know Scripture talks about that. And that draw for the collective consciousness. And I believe that that's vital right there, because what you have is, these spiritual beings that are trying to become that voice of God, rather than us being able to have that relationship with a creator God. They're trying to draw that attention away from God and basically receive that glory, that recognition as a God themselves, which goes right back to Scripture, what we're told, why were they cast down? It was because of that pride, and what was Lucifer's pride? I will become like the Most High. So I think it takes us right back to Scripture and all of that.
Nathaniel, thoughts on what the priest said? The poses are sending a back signal. They're talking. They're summoning. Like you said, basically, we are doing a type of ritual.
Yes, and we become altered at their altar. There's a conscious connection, not just between the hand motions, but literally the phenomenon making us in its own image, making us do things in its image and for its honor. And this gets back to a pathology that a lot of people in ufology don't want to exist. And that is absolutely, whatever these things are, they do want to be emulated and venerated. They do want to have groves like it talks about in biblical antiquity. And they do want altars. And it's something that's an inconvenient truth for a lot of ufologists because they don't know how to answer that, right? And even, I don't want to pig trail into this little area, but they don't even know why sigils are appearing on abductees.
Yes.
It doesn't make sense because it's not meant to. It's only seen, again, from my perspective, it's only accurately understood through the ancient lens. And so there's this kind of cognitive dissonance. Why would an extraterrestrial carve sigils into skin? Well, why would they want altars built? Mm-hmm. Right? And so there's this kind of incongruence with their model of the phenomenon and what the intelligence truly wants from our species.
Yeah. It's a crazy time right now. And we're all trying to figure out, as we dive deeper and deeper into these type of subjects and talks, what do they want? Are we worshiping them? We are. But you said something interesting that I want you to get into, and then get into it. You said that we could possibly, they're summoning us.
Yes, 100%.
So they're summoning us. That stood out to me. We're not summoning them. They're summoning us. It's a deception. They've obviously said, how do we get them to do this? So there's many different ways. Let's dive into that topic and subject. What are your thoughts on that, Nathaniel?
So in my research dealing with cases, like literally in homes, I started doing incubi cases. That's primarily where my career started. And that includes entities that were appearing to women in the images of their husbands.
Wow.
What I noticed was a common pathology through and through. And it bled through not just incubi cases, but not just demonology, the debunk phenomenon, and now, which we're talking about this evening, which is ufology. And here's the pathology. It's very important. That is that there is a difference between what the phenomenon is from the peripheral vision in what it appears to be once we observe it over and over again. Matter of fact, I believe I may have mentioned this case in our last show together. One of the cases I've been working on and the family I've been working with consists of a mother who had been taken by these alleged extraterrestrials, right? And the phenomenon would manifest to the family all at the same time. So for a case in point, the mother would be sleeping on the couch in the living room. The son, who I'm in contact with, would be watching television with the father. All of a sudden, an energy field of corpuscular balls of light would materialize in the room. And it would slowly move over the mother as she slept. All three of them witnessed the phenomenon.
Wow.
But to each of them, it appeared differently. So what happened was, once the phenomenon took this experiencer, which was the mother, she was returned with sigils from head to toe that followed the occult practice and teachings of Austin Osman Spar, which he said, and this is fascinating, that there are 3 stages of the ritualization within sigilization. That is when the sigils are carved into the skin. The body absorbs the sigils, the body activates the sigils, and the body ejects them at the culmination and the successful completion of the ritual. That's what happened to this woman. Moreover, she thought she was abducted by actual aliens. But to everybody on the outside, what they saw were just corpuscular balls of light, varying different shapes and sizes. And so what I looked at is a pathology that has pattern confirming evidence behind it. And that is this, that the phenomenon, when it wants to incarnate, it will seek to be seen by the experiencer. Over and over and over again. If it's to the left of the peripheral vision, it will look like something completely different than it does once it incarnates within the gaze of the experiencer. So I saw this over and over again. I started wondering what's going on. Why is it, right, that the incubi victims believe they were copulating with their husbands? Where was this learning matrix getting these archetypes? That's when I started getting into quantum mechanics, understanding the way reality works. I'm going to illustrate this, or at least try to articulate it the best way I know how. It's called the observer effect. Borrowed from quantum mechanics, it suggests that by observing something, it changes its state. When you observe the phenomenon responds to your observation of it. I'm suggesting, and I'm working with other researchers on this, that it goes back to the double slit experiment, where once you lock your conscious gaze upon it, the phenomenon uses the observer effect to trigger an archetype to where now we are directly influencing what's manifesting to us. Now, what that means is the archetype it's incarnating, ghosts, aliens, are real to the experiencer because it's the observer effect triggering the archetype from the phenomenon. Okay? So to dive deeper in this, what this means is, this is why I should say we have hybridism in incubi literature and in ufology, right? We have orbs manifesting apparitions and cryptids. Why? It's because the pathology remains the same. What's different are the archetypes the phenomenon is incarnating when it's interfacing with us. Now, what that also means, again, dealing with the observer effect, once we observe it, it's like a particle locking into its position. It's in quantum mechanics. By observing the phenomenon, it changes the phenomenon being observed. What this means, and I've noticed this also in parapsychology, Steve Maris noticed this, Barry Fitzgerald's noticed this, is that there's a difference between when the phenomenon manifests and when it incarnates. When it incarnates, it will seek to be observed. And when it seeks to be observed, we will, of course, right, will think it's Uncle Ted.
Yeah.
Because that's what the phenomenon's incarnating, right? It's using us to create a mask to hide behind. Now, the reason this is so important is because right now in ufology, we are having what's called the CE5 movement.
Can you repeat that, or the what?
Yes, what's called the CE5 movement. I'm going to kind of anchor this because this is really interesting. The CE5 movement, it's the fifth form of contact, it's close encounters. It was originally brought about by a scientist by the name of J. Allen Hynek, and then recently, or most recently, by a gentleman named Stephen Greer. But the whole theory is that you and I can go out into, let's say, the darkness at nighttime, and we will observe the sky. And what they're realizing, and this is profound, is that just like all the other archetypes that they're employing against our species, right? And just like the weaponization of the observer effect throughout all of the literature, they're realizing that what they're witnessing with their eyes is completely different than what they're capturing on camera.
Wow.
Because the phenomenon seeks to be observed when it wants to hide from us.
Wow.
So much so, my friends, that these practitioners of the CE5 movement are looking at what they're thinking they're encountering, what they're thinking they're interfacing with, and then comparing it to what they have on camera. And here's the key point. They don't know what came through that portal. They don't know. All they know is that the phenomenon sought to be observed. And so this gets down in some very murky water.
Yeah.
But dealing with trance states, dealing with what they're calling downloads now in ufology, where people will literally just be sitting down for dinner and they'll get a thought. This is what I'm saying. They're conjuring us to conjure them. They'll get a thought in their mind to go outside and observe the phenomenon. And upon observing the phenomenon, they think, oh my God, look what happened. I created contact with him. So I'm the one that made this conscious connection with whatever this intelligence is. But that's not true. They made first contact when they put the thought in your mind to go observe it. And then when you observed it, they incarnated in your presence. Is it making sense so far?
Yeah, but you got to get into it, because here's keep going. But the question is, can they make us look? Can they convince us that they can? Okay, get into that. That's the theme.
Yeah.
This is fascinating to me. So dealing with this theory, right? I thought I was losing my mind, honestly.
Yeah.
I'm like, I know I'm looking at the bloody footprints in the snow. I know the pathology is present throughout all the literature. I know the phenomenon, entities will seek to be seen. And once they're witnessed, observed, they will construct a masquerade, right? This is the same thing with Ikigai literature. It's the same thing with aliens that abduct people. By the time you observe them, by observing them, it helps them hold their shape. Okay? Oh, I'm an alien. Why? Right? It's the learning matrix employed by the phenomenon. A matter of fact, I had a case years ago of a woman that thought she was copulating with her husband. It looked like her husband, right? And everything was right, apparently. But she said that just before the encounter, she felt this kind of deep sleep. And this is going to be a very profound connection.
Wow.
She felt like she was in a deep sleep. In combined with that slumber, it manifested to her. And then it created this archetype of her husband. So what we have is a trance-like state. Number two, we have the entity seeking her gaze as the experiencer. By putting her into a trance and seeking her gaze, it created a mask. And it actually held that mask, held the shape of her husband all the way to the completion of the ritual.
Wow.
And only when she started to come to, the phenomenon was starting to pull its influence off of her. That's when the entity started to lose its shape. There were physiognomical issues, facial features, facial expressions that the woman realized did not belong to her husband.
Wow.
That's when it moved to the left, not the front, right? Again, it's the observer effect. Now it's not being observed. It collapsed itself into a shadowy figure, kind of a smoky apparition, faded off into the hallway. Now, I was approaching this as a theory, right? Going through the stages of pathology. When the phenomenon wants to hide behind a mask, if it wants to appear as something it's not to manipulate our species, it will seek to be observed. And once we observe it, it will use the observer effect to collapse itself into an archetype. This is why we have cryptids that aren't really cryptids, why we have ghosts that aren't really ghosts, why people believe, right, they're in contact with a deceased lover or a husband on the other side. It's the phenomenon. So I went through a really dark period of time. You know, I was staring into the abyss. And so finally I reached out to a dear friend of mine in England. And so we're kind of doing the same research, not even kind of, like the same research. I'm approaching it from a different aspect, but these are scientific men.
Okay.
I said, so what do you think is going on in the CE5 movement? Is it possible that they are putting people in trances once, right, by leading them out into the wilderness, right, and then saying, okay, here's the illusion of control. You're in control of the contact experiment. Not me, you are. And so they go out there following the leading of a thought implanted by the phenomenon that's seeking to incarnate. So here you go.
Yeah.
He said that in what's called Project Doorway, this is Steve Marin, Barry Fitzgerald's research, that they were going out and looking with other people to watch the phenomenon. But at the same time, they were measuring, they had something on their heads that was measuring the brain waves of the observers as they're watching the sky. And he said, when the phenomenon manifested, it began changing the brain waves of the observer into what's called theta brain waves. Theta is the inducing, it's the same brain waves we have when we're induced into trances, into a slumber, to where literally, once the phenomenon manifested to them, it had created a conscious connection between the phenomenon and the observer. And this is what I'm suggesting, is that we're not conjuring them. They're conjuring us.
Wow.
And it's through the illusion of control that these experiencers, not even realizing it, it's latched onto them. And at the end of the day, they're putting into trances, and they're not realizing that what they're actually seeing with their eyes is not at all what the phenomenon is. Did that make sense?
Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah.
So Jesse, I'll let you go first because
interesting.
I got some questions. You go first.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. What you're actually describing are things that that have been experienced. You know, as you're talking about the theta, I'm curious as to the connection with that, because I've talked about within the military how you have the Voice of God project. And in that project, there are two types of warriors that two people trained. They have the alpha, which are going to be those that, are kind of like your preppers for end time events and things that are to happen. And, they're going to kind of get the vision. They're going to kind of have the foreknowledge, and they're going to make sure that everything is set up so that when the event happens, everything's in place. But then you have the theta warriors that, those are the people, they're part of this collective consciousness. They're receiving things, and the goal behind this is where it gets interesting. The goal of the enemy is that he cannot get people into, or his beings will say, into other dimensions. He has to use human hosts and connect them to these beings in order to get his army into the throne of God to usurp it. That's kind of the whole gist behind everything. And so you have these theta warriors that are trained, that purposely they have these unconscious connections to spiritual beings. They're not called up until the event in which they're needed, and those, spiritual beings are going to be called to account for. So that's interesting. And then you add to that, that as they're trying to find individuals to make these connections to, they have what's called biofeedback. And you literally were describing that they're, in biofeedback, they're looking for who perceives things the same and to what percentage. And they purposely will link people who have experiences in other spiritual dimensions, or seeing into the spirit world, who perceive the same. That's what they're looking for. And to what percent do you perceive the same? And on average, I would say, what they consider close connections is if they find 2-3 people who see at 60% the same thing. But there are people who do see things more than that percentage. But it was interesting that you were describing all of that. And that is, actual documented research projects within our U.S. military, all that information.
Absolutely.
Go ahead, Nathaniel, if you want to touch on that.
And the scariest part about this, again, it's the inducing of the experience into a trance-like state. That is another common pathology. And it's largely ignored in ufology because they don't have, how can I answer for that? Yeah. How can we trust a love and light narrative if we can't even trust our perception of the phenomenon? And this gets back to, again, which we're going to, we're already an hour into it. Yeah. We barely scratched the surface of this. But yes, the phenomenon has the ability, again, to manage our perception of it. And this gets back to the concept that even within the occult, what I'm looking at as a possibility is that even in the rituals they're performing to call upon their names, it seems to be them that are performing the rituals, calling the occultists their names. And they're not realizing that the conscious connection was made with the original download. I'm getting passionate, guys. I apologize.
Yeah. No.
It gets back to obey me. Come look. Come observe me real quick. And then they go out thinking, oh my God, look, this is incredible. Look what I can do. Next thing you know, no, they're being induced into a trance-like state. And I'll even go as far to say that rituals are being performed on them. And by the time the observer realizes it, the phenomenon lifts its influence. It's no longer, right? We've seen that right in the field. I'm not an alien.
Yeah.
I'm something else entirely. I'm not even a ghost.
Yeah.
And they end up with being covered from head to toe in sigils. So this is a huge piece to the puzzle, because I don't know about you guys, but I was always told, don't trust everything you see.
Correct. Yeah.
And now we're starting to add some pieces to this, even scientifically, that says, yeah, they're doing things to us and allowing us to believe in the illusion of control. It seeks to be seen, and why?
This is some crazy stuff, guys. If you're just tuning in, I mean, we're talking about ufology, the CE5 movement. Nathaniel, connecting with aliens, the CE5, contact guided meditation. I bring this up because they're saying to you, do you want to speak to aliens or superior beings? Then we're going to show you how to do it through contact guided meditation, meaning you could do this. You don't, basically, ladies and gentlemen, you no longer need to go old school with the candles and the blood and the rituals and all that stuff. They're actually trying to make it even easier for you to communicate with these spiritual beings, these entities, demons or aliens, whatever you want to call them. They're actually making it easier. Would you say that's correct?
100%. 100%.
Okay. Just explain really briefly the meaning, for those that are new, what the CE5 means. What is the meaning for CE5, please?
So these are close encounters, and this is what's called a self-initiated contact experience. It's the fifth stage. I won't go through all the first four, but the fifth one is essentially, allegedly, which we just kind of deconstructed that lie, but allegedly the individual has the ability to go out on their own to an undisclosed location, right? Of course, of their choosing, and then to observe the phenomenon, to make a conscious connection with the phenomenon. And at the very end of it, they're the ones who induce the contact experience themselves, not the intelligence itself. And so that's where I believe the lie comes in. They're not the observer, they're the observed. They're not the conjurers, they're the conjured. They're not the predators, they're the prey. I had a case working with a lady who was actually trained in Stephen Greer's CE5 movement, knew all the protocols, followed all of the rules, and a full-bodied apparition manifested in her house.
Wow.
So this is what I'm saying. If there is a difference, I'm not talking about just small little nuances of a difference, no, but literally what they're thinking they're seeing with their eyes is not what they're picking up on camera. So something is manifesting. Something is using the observer as a mortal portal. It is incarnating into our world, but it's not what we think it is. And so that, my friends, I think it at least makes us, or should, question who's conjuring who here and how much power we have over that.
Okay, well said. Now, I'm going to get into something which will take us to the next stage of this conversation, which is you discussed that during the situation, the observer appeared with sigils on their bodies. Okay, sigils are something that I studied in the occult. Magically, how they're made, how you get rid of them, how you power them. But initially, for the simplicity of it, a sigil is basically a logo or the name of a spiritual being or entity. Okay, that's what it roots from. Now there's modern day magic, there's chaos magic, where they try to manifest their own desires, and it can mean something else. Like McDonald's and others can be considered sigils of its original state, what they made. Okay, so a sigil is the logo representing the name of an entity or demon. So you're saying that this person appeared with sigils on their body. So that would be more than one demon, or one demon
more than one intention. Yeah, or a practitioner, and I'm still dealing with that myself. At least personally, to be very transparent with you.
Okay.
Because, we can have demons. We also have practitioners that work with them. So it's kind of like, that's a very gray area for me. But yes, now what's called biosigilization, this gets very dark very quickly.
Yeah.
But they're not just the pictorial signatures or iconography of the practitioner or the demon, but it's also them literally writing their intentions into the victim themselves. Now, I'm going to throw this out there because it's another troubling aspect that ufologists don't want to talk about, is the fact that when you combine sigilization with the presence of secretions, you're creating a hybrid. You're creating an entity that is not just a hybrid, but it is a replica of life. We first see it with Paracelsus and Homunculus. Then we see it with the Golem of Prague, where when you have literally an entity that is using secretions with sigilization, that's the true nature of the hybridization program, according to Nathaniel Gillis.
Yes.
And dare I say that we're seeing that first in the occult, but now in ufology.
Yeah.
To the point, my friends, if I can get this kind of detailed, that it's at the moment of conception. This is chaos theory. At the moment of conception, if you know what I mean, that's when the sigilization occurs. Insemination occurs right directly with sigilization.
Yeah.
Both of those carve the practitioner's intent into the hybrid child. Now, what's the point of this? Throughout history, at least in my research necronetics, I discovered another behavioral pattern where practitioners were employing sigils and secretions, and then the commandeering the avatar they were inseminating them with. Literally, the fetus is now their own body to inhabit. Crazy, I know.
Yeah.
But if there is a foundation of ritual here, and there are successful, I guess, combinations of old memory into new matter, then what happens when the ritual fails? I'm collecting evidence now where even the way they dispatch of the hybrid entity is also ritualized. To the point, and I'll kind of bring it in here in a second, to the point that Dr. Carla Turner had a case study of hybridization, which is going to blow your mind, where first of all, the experiencer didn't remember it until memory regression took place, and they're starting to get in, okay, or subconscious, like, what, do you remember any of this? She's like, yeah. She goes, I remember me and my husband were kind of, we were having issues in the marriage. We weren't intimate during this time in our marriage. And she said, and I remember being abducted by these beings. They impregnated me. And she said, but I remember that this fetus was a hybrid and that it was not a viable specimen. Her words, not mine. It would not live. And so what she did, and this goes into Paracelsus and Homunculi, at the moment she said that she gave birth to the creature inside the bathroom, the phenomenon forced her to perform another ritual. Take a glass jar, which is, again, one of Paracelsus' rituals in Homunculi. Place it in a glass jar and bury it in the earth. So what I'm looking at is literally, these are not fluid rituals. Right? It's literally, if this fails, we have to perform another one in order to secure it. And so I guess my point here, guys, is that people don't want to discuss the occult and ufology because there's too many threads to pull at. And once you start pulling at them, you start to realize that all of this is a masquerade.
Yeah.
That a lot of this, they are not just symbols. Those are sigils that are directly in contact with an entity.
Correct.
And I'll shut up after this, I promise. But now we have cases where this is taking place and the phenomenon is performing the ritual all the way up to impregnation and then apporting objects into the home to help take care of the child.
Jeez.
So what are we dealing with here? It's a little bit more complex, right, than the regular horns and hooves. But this is it's complete and total manipulation of our species. It's everything we thought it was and more.
Yeah. Guys, it's a lot to unpack while you're watching. I know it's a lot, and we try to break it down for you. I'll reference you to this. Sigil magic, sigil power. Do some research on that. Me and Jesse have touched on it. He touched on the bottle being buried with so forth. That goes back a lot to the ancient jinns and Middle Eastern magic. That's that 100%. Aspect of it.
Liber vacay.
Correct. So when we're dealing now with sigils, and he was talking about insemination, let me put it this way, and then you can do your own research on it. Sigils are powered through, let's say, sex magic. And a lot of times during sex magic, at the height of orgasm for these people, is when you empower it. Now, out of the research that I've done and the participation in magic, learning from sigils, I don't know any other way of powering up a sigil. It's
Absolutely
through
not.
sex magic. There's just no other way. It's almost
Right.
created through that, through feeding the entity. The entity needs that. They need that power and energy. So sigils are created through that to empower them. It's a deep conversation. I know you guys might be a little bit lost, but just research a little bit on that and sigil power, and you'll get a little bit more on what he's saying in regards to that. Now, just to touch a little bit more on sigils, going into the last 15 minutes of the program, in the green room, you had mentioned a particular individual that conducted magic. There were
Correct.
experiments going on in what he was doing. And I'm referring to a particular Dr.
John
D.
D.
John D.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'll let you take it from there and we'll close it with
Yeah.
that. Get into it.
Okay, so there was an Elizabethan magician. His name was Edward Kelly, and then there was a polymath and mathematician by the name of John D. Both of them wanted to pursue the occult for the purposes of scientific advancement. So, as it was, Edward Kelly was a seer. What he would do in order to perform his ritual to see is he would stare into what's called an obsidian mirror. Now, we touched on the observer effect before, but this gets into some very interesting aspects of it. By staring into this mirror, he comes in contact with an entity that not only tells him that she is an angel, but through a series of other rituals, some that included sex magic, literally swapping wives at the very end. It's diabolical. But she began to give John D. and Edward Kelly what's called the Enochian language.
Yes.
Now, that's a foundation. But it was in one of these rituals of seeing into the mirror, interfacing with it, that they begin to see not just manifestations of apparitions, but they begin to see balls of light with little men staring at them from the inside, floating throughout the room. So this is particularly important because in the 1990s, there was a group of experimenters and scientists in the Russian Academy of Sciences. Yes, a scrying mirror. And what they did is they took a theory from a guy named Nikolai Kozyrov, and he had what's called the Kozyrov mirror, which essentially was a mirror that he twisted and curved into itself. I want to make sure I articulate what this is real quick so it was a spiral-shaped tube of polished aluminum or other reflective materials. So within the Russian Academy of Sciences, they had hired these group of scientists to go into an undisclosed location, top secret, far and away from public society. Their goal was to literally, just like the scrying mirror, is to sit inside this Kozyrov mirror, turn the lights out, shut all of their senses off, hoping that they would interface with an intelligence. Sure enough, they did. In one of their sessions, the phenomenon began to manifest symbols in their interface. These practitioners began to see symbols and sigils manifest in front of them. Not just that, this gets back to Paracelsus, chaos magic, and homunculi. But in one of their sessions, the practitioner began to speak in an unknown language where the phenomenon had induced him into a trance and basically commandeered his body and was seeing itself through him. It became self-seeing. It was during this particular interface event that the scientists said that the sigils dissolved and a portal opened up. And he said just as far as he could see, he said there was this shadowy figure standing off into the distance. And you say, now I'm witnessing this, right? It's like I'm looking at this entity, He said, I don't know what it wants for me. I just know that it's present. He said that out of nowhere, there is a homunculus embryonic entity that moves into my vision. That's when the shadow figure said, you can look at him if you want. That's when this embryonic homunculus being moved to the edge of the mirror, and they both were staring at each other.
Jeez.
At the end, this is very interesting, at least to me, it was at the end of this that the phenomenon had incarnated a profound terror in the room. So much so that the scientist decided to go out to his car. He got a cross. He brings the cross into the room itself, places it in front of the mirror, and it didn't work. It got a little bit stronger. So he thought to himself, and this is what I mean when they conjure us to conjure them. He's like, you know what? I have an emblem of peace at my house. There's thumbs up, by the way. Woo! And so he goes back and he gets this emblem of peace. He goes back into the room in front of the mirror. He shoves that emblem in front of the mirror, and the fear begins to materialize. Even in his words, it felt like you could reach out and touch it. So that's when they leave the building. They shut down the experiment because it went awry. And on their way out of the building, after just scrying, they're met face to face with a security guard. And he said, I don't know what you guys have been doing in there, but there has been a silver metallic object hovering over that building for the last 2 hours. Since that moment, in that particular area, there was it was a hot spot for UFOs and UAP. Not just that, but for paranormal activity. So my point is that whatever we're dealing with cannot be trusted. It has the ability to give us the illusion of control. And even with Professor Renee Hardy, these scientists are realizing, even scientists I've worked with, they're realizing that even though they want to approach the phenomenon through the scientific method, even though they don't believe this has anything to do with spirituality or the occult, at the end of the day, they are forced to perform rituals for this intelligence, and that intelligence incarnates because of it.
Guys, I mean, it's a lot to unpack. I get it. It's an amazing show. It is a master class. And I believe a lot of what he's saying. The simplified terminology is we cannot trust what we see or what we know, because he's basically saying that these entities can disguise themselves 100%. You've heard the old saying, they are among us, and they are. It's an unbelievable thing. Scrying, again, we talked about that, how people looked in the mirror and did this. But the fascinating part of this is when he talked about this ritual of them scrying and opening up portals, something appeared in that vicinity that security witnessed. While they were scrying, they must have opened up a gateway or doorway because something was there, a sphere was there. Where did it come from? How did it get there?
There we go. And once again, by seeking our gaze, come observe me.
Yeah.
Come look at me. Yeah. I'm just this. I'm, it's all love and light. I would never do that to you. And then you wake up the next day with sigils all over your body. Matter of fact, this particular experiencer had to go to the ER. Wow. And the doctors had to give her a heated blanket because, now this is important too, because she had burns on her body. So her body, it wasn't just sigils, they were burned. And this is why I glare and roll my eyes at a lot of the love and light stuff, just like I did now, because it's laughable. Yeah. When you actually get down to the pathology of it, you start to see beyond the archetypes, and you realize that, yes, whatever this is, it's primeval, it's ancient. And
there it is.
It wants everything at all. It's always wanted. It's never changed. What has changed is the archetype, the mask it wears. Yeah. And so during these interface events, test the spirits.
Yeah.
Perfectly said. It's prime, it's ancient, it's evil. And no matter what generation we're in, it tries to mask itself in a different thing. But now more than ever, I truly believe that our eyes are opening to this, and it's becoming more it's becoming more prevalent in public. People are now talking about it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think I love what you're saying too. I mean, the truth is that it brings us to that recognition of true reality. You know, growing up, we're taught that there's a separation between the physical, the spiritual, that maybe the spiritual doesn't even exist at all. You know, maybe not everybody will ever experience that. Yet here you are telling us that the spiritual reality is tangible. It can be proven scientifically, mathematically. Like there, you know, up until this point, there has been a strong attempt to separate those realities. And yet here you are giving us the proof that the spiritual is experienceable in a very tangible way. You know, there's testimony of that. And, you know, it brings us to that place where we have to admit that there's spiritual warfare, that, you know, there's something out there that does not have our best interest at heart. And, you know, when we understand that concept, that we are in a war, that, you know, that there are true entities that do not have our good at heart, you know, we realize we have to be conscious. We have to be concerned. We have to, you know, we have to be willing to guard our hearts and our minds in Christ Jesus, you know. So I appreciate that you're bringing all of this forward today.
Thank you. Thank you.
Incredible.
I appreciate it.
Whitney
Appreciate
says,
you. I appreciate you. Appreciate it. How about that?
Whitney says, so many people are waking up. It's a beautiful thing. And it is. Another is his servant. This is a very important show. Thank you. Hope Nathaniel is on again. All that and much more. Everyone loving the show. Again, you might have to go back. We've given you a lot of research material to really look into what Nathaniel's saying. But man, this is just the beginning. A series. It has to happen on this show with Nathaniel as we get more into it and dive in different scenarios. You know, ufology and the CE5 movement. We'll get more into it in the months to come. Nathaniel, we thank you for being here. We're going to be doing an after show, ladies and gentlemen, right after this on my Patreon, where we're going to give you a chance to ask Nathaniel questions, Jesse or myself, anything you want, and we'll do everything in our power to answer those questions. But here's your chance, guys, to ask some questions. Again, we thank all the beautiful people for tuning in and watching. We'll be back next Monday. But right after this, we're doing an after show and a Q&A. Before we get there, Jesse, anything you'd like to say to anyone where they can follow and support your ministry?
Yeah, you can find me on kingdomlivingwithjesse.com. And I encourage you to check that out and join us with Nathaniel on the after show.
Awesome. Nathaniel, how can people support and follow your work?
Just subscribe to my YouTube channel. There's a playlist full of my interviews that you guys can watch. It's and I'll just be very frank. A lot of times you have to replay it because I go everywhere at the same time. That's my YouTube channel. It's under my same name. And then you can follow me on my Instagram account. That's how the people connect to me the most. So thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Nathaniel. For myself, guys, I want to appreciate and show some love to everybody watching. And if you can show some love, go to paypal.me/George Iceman. The link is in the description. Thank you so much, guys. It's always a pleasure. And we love being here, bringing you this type of information on a Monday. Join us for the after show. It's coming up next. It's going to be crazy. It's a Q&A. You don't want to miss it. Thank you for watching. God bless. Good night, everyone.